The last red glow of an Arizona sunset still clung to the back of the American Mike's eyes, but the air no longer carried the dry sand and dust of Route 66. In its place came a clean knife-cold chill, and a thin thread of sandalwood incense mist rolled across a wide training square. Hundreds of disciples stood in neat ranks, blue-white robes, hung stiff on their bodies long swords. In their hands caught the light like ice all of their killing focus. Gathered on one place at the center stood a single figure that did not belong, a broad-shouldered, blonde-haired American with blue eyes, Mike. A moment ago, he had been driving his Peterbilt 389 through a silent night. The cab radio had been blasting Elvis and old rock and roll. Then the world snapped out from under him, and he came down hard on cold stone. Now his back pressed against a slab marked with a taiji diagram. Strange men in ancient clothes surrounded him. Their eyes held the calm of people looking at an animal meant for slaughter. Mike tried to breathe. His thoughts were thick and slow like wet cement. His body moved on instinct anyway. His hand went to his waist. A heavy tool waited there. The red-handled chrome vanadium wrench he carried for breakdowns and trouble. On the road high above him stood an old man on a raised platform. His face looked like dead wood. His gaze looked like iron that had forgotten warmth. This was Elder Xuanji. He spoke in a harsh ancient tongue. Mike could not understand a single word, but he understood the contempt in the old man's eyes. It was the look of someone deciding that another life had no value. Elder Xuanji did not care what Mike tried to say. Two fingers lifted and came together like a blade. A cold force burst forward. A flying sword wrapped in sword Q shot straight for the base of Mike's neck. Mike's survival instinct moved faster than thought. Years on the highway had trained him to read death before it arrived. In the instant the cold light reached his face, he ripped the wrench from its leather holster. He gripped it with both hands. He threw it up like a brace under a falling beam. Metal screamed against metal. The impact rang across the square like a thunderclap. Modern alloy met a spirit sword and did not break. Sparks sprayed into the fog. Pain tore open the skin of his palms. Blood ran down his fingers. But his arms did not fold. His strength was not only fat and muscle, it was leverage learned from tools and weight and stubborn machines. He twisted the wrench head and caught the blade in the spiral mouth. He locked it there. Hard. The entire crowd shuddered. Whispers jumped from mouth to mouth. Elder Xuanji showed a flash of surprise. He had not expected this outsider iron thing to be so tough. Mike gasped for air. His heart hammered like a diesel engine pushed past redline. He knew he had only bought a breath, not safety. His hands throbbed as if they were on fire. He pinned the sword edge down with a bloody wrench. Then he raised his free hand and started signing like a desperate man in a storm. He pointed at the taiji diagram on the stone. He held up 3 fingers. Then he drew a line across his own throat. Elder Xuanji understood the message. 3 days, learn the sword or die. A thin, cruel smile climbed onto the old monk's mouth. He nodded slowly, as if granting a favor, not mercy, only humiliation. Then Elder Xuanji struck. A palm landed on Mike's lower abdomen with casual precision. Something inside Mike shattered like glass. A deep cracking. Pain swallowed his vision. Blackness rushed in. At the edges he felt his meridians. Lam shot. He felt the hopeless weight of a ruined Dantian. Like an engine seized without warning, 2 disciples grabbed him. They dragged him across the stone like a sack of trash. They did not look at his face. They did not care that he was bleeding. They hauled him toward the back mountain. They threw him into a spirit pig pen that reeked of filth. The stench rose like a wall and the cold air bit into his skin as the gate slammed shut behind him. The pain in his gut felt like a red-hot branding iron being driven straight, and Elder Xuanji had shown no mercy with that palm strike. Mike felt something deep in his lower belly explode like glass cold, poured out from the shattered Dantian and spread through his whole body. In a blink his limbs felt frozen solid. The brute strength he once trusted now felt like a rusted piston locked in place. 2 outer disciples dragged him across the stone like a dead dog. His heavy work boots scraped the slabs and screamed with every pull. A long, hopeless mark trailed behind him. At the back mountain, they tossed him into a low, cramped pen like trash. Mike hit a pile of wet, fermented straw and mud. His organs felt like they shifted out of place before he could even catch his breath. A stink hit him hard enough to drop an elephant. It was filth mixed with sour slop and damp mold. It went straight up into his skull. The pain in the skull, the pain and the stench almost knocked him out. Then that stink snapped a buried memory away. The choking ammonia bite mixed with cold wind felt just like winter nights beside cheap gas stations along Route 66. It smelled like diesel. It smelled like survival for a moment. The filthy pen turned into the Arizona wasteland in his mind. The wind in his ears became the low, steady rumble of a Peterbilt engine. At idle, that illusion lit a small flame in his dead gray eyes. He grit his teeth with the one hand that could still move. He grabbed a fistful of mud. He fought to sit up. A heavy snort exploded above his head. Mike looked up and met a pair of pig eyes glowing red like hot coals. A massive spotted spirit pig stood there, As big as a compact car, this was the queen of the pen. Big Mama, she hated the two-legged thing that had fallen into her bed. She pawed the ground with her front hooves, her tusks gleamed in the moonlight. In his condition, one hit would end him, but Mike did not close his eyes and wait a lifetime. On the highway had trained his body to read danger before it arrived. As he stared at the beast, he caught one tiny detail. Right before she charged, her huge body made a small backward sinking motion. It was the same pause a heavy rig makes the instant the clutch bites. Now when Big Mama tensed her back legs and her weight dipped Mike through every last ounce of strength. Sideways he rolled toward a wooden post, smeared with manure. A thunder crash shook the pen. Big Mama missed by a hair and slammed the fence. Instead, wood exploded into splinters. Mike sucked in air like he had been pulled from deep water in that half-beat, where death moved a little too slow. He felt it a rhythm that might let him live. Mike stared at the spotted spirit pig, named Big Mama. The rhythm of her breath matched the vibration of his Peterbilt at idle. Each time she scraped the ground to charge, her fat body compressed like hydraulic suspension. Then it snapped forward in one violent release. Mike kept the rusty red-handled wrench clenched in his fist, his shoulders set without thinking, as if his hands were finding a steering wheel. In this moment, he was no longer a lamb waiting to be butchered. He was a driver trying to tame a runaway rig 3 days past, and the pig pen became his cab. Big Mama snorted and charged again. This time, Mike did not roll away like a man panicking. His left foot drew a circle in the mud. At the instant, the pig head was about to smash into him. He turned and leaned in. It was like correcting a skid on black ice. It did not take brute force. It took timing and a willingness to go with the slide. The massive pig body brushed his shoulder and rushed past. The released power made Mike sway, but did not break him. Big Mama could not stop herself. She plunged straight into the manure pile and buried her head. Mike felt his heart kick hard in his chest. The feeling was clear and sharp. This was the clutch bite moment, not early and not late, right on the edge where power becomes motion. He was still locked in that strange driving sense when the wooden pen door was kicked open. An outer disciple walked in, pinching his nose. This was Ligu in his other hand. He carried a slop bucket with a chipped rim. When he saw Mike still alive, surprise flashed across his face. Then it curdled into deeper disgust. He dumped cold rice mixed with sand and gravel onto the filth-soaked ground. He muttered ugly words that did not need translation. The look in his eyes said, the outsider deserved to eat. Like an animal, Mike could not understand the language, but he understood contempt. Ligu lifted his palm to smack Mike's head like swatting a fly. Mike moved the instant Ligu raised his hand. Mike caught a gap he knew from engines. Old force was spent, new force had not arrived. It was the free rev moment before the next bite. Mike did not meet strength with strength. He sank his shoulder and copied the pig storing power. He followed the direction of the slap and gave a small guiding push. Then his feet drew an odd half circle in the mudly go, felt as if he had pushed into spinning cotton. His center slipped out from under him. He staggered several steps and nearly went face first into the feeding trough. Ligu stood there shaking with humiliation for a heartbeat. He looked ready to kill. Then he remembered the elder's order. He swallowed the urge and kept his hands to himself. He sneered and let a wet sound build in his throat. He spat a thick yellow glob onto the dirty rice. Then he pointed at the mess. Then he pointed at Mike. His eyes laughed as he gave the choice without words: do not eat and starve, eat and become a pig. Mike watched the thick spit slowly soak into the gray rice. His stomach rumbled like distant thunder, but the heat in his eyes cooled into seasoned cunning. At a Route 66 rest stop, nobody learned faster than him how to handle a bully looking for trouble. Ligu thought it was pure humiliation to Mike. It was a weapon being placed in his hand. When Ligu finally left with a winner's smirk, Mike did not touch the food. He lifted his fingers to his lips and whistled the way he used to on a Texas ranch. Big Mama lumbered over with a low snort. She did not care about the extra seasoning. She licked up every grain of that sour rice mixed with grit and spit in 2 hungry gulps. Payback came faster than the brakes on an 18-wheeler in less than half an hour. The pig pen filled with non-stop diarrhea. Sounds the foul smell surged so hard it drowned even the usual stench of manure. Ahala, 湿壤矮了. It drifted straight up to the elder's compound. Halfway up the mountain, Elder Xuanxia arrived with his nose pinched and his face dark. He saw the filth everywhere, and Big Mama still spraying without mercy. Rage flashed through him. On the spot, Ligu tried to explain, but he had no words that could save him. These spirit pigs were precious, and letting them eat anything unclean was a serious crime. So on the eve of the life and death wager, this proud Taiji Sect disciple had to strip off his robe. He shoveled knee-deep pig filth for 2 full days and 2 full nights. With every scoop, his hatred for that far man deepened another notch. The 3-day deadline vanished in a blink at the sound of the morning bell. 2 enforcement disciples dragged Mike like a dead dog to the trial sword platform. The training field was packed with onlookers. Everyone wanted to watch the outsider get carved up. and made an example. Elder Xuanji sat high on the platform. With a look of contempt, he casually tossed something down a rotten deadwood. Sword pocked with wormholes, landed at Mike's feet. Then Li Gao jumped onto the ring with murder in his eyes. He had washed, but the pigpen stink still clung to him like a curse in his hand. He held a fine steel sword that gleamed with cold light. Its edge had been smeared with a thick layer of white stone powder. Elder Xuanji announced the rules with ice in his voice. If the sword edge brushed Mike and left a single white mark, it counted. As one loss, if Mike collected 10 white marks, he would be beheaded on the spot. Li Gao rolled his wrist and flicked his sword. White powder shook loose and drifted down. His grin made the promise clear. He would not let Mike die quickly. He would paint those 10 death marks slowly, like a cat playing with a mouse. Li Gao stepped in, and his sword drew a bright white arc through the fog. He moved with the 3 rings around the moon technique. The steel circled Mike's head and shoulders in 3 linked sweeps. Every swing carried stone powder ready to paint a mark. Mike lifted the rotten wooden sword. It felt wrong in his hands, too light, too dead, like gripping a broken steering wheel. He did not try to copy Li Gao. He did not try to well Gao. He did not chase elegant angles. He only took a wide stance and let his hips loosen. He remembered every time a trailer tried to fishtail in hard wind. He remembered how you do not fight the sway, you guide it into a circle until it becomes stable like Go. Lunged and the white edge flashed for Mike's chest. Mike swung the deadwood sword in a full round sweep. The swing did not cut it, did not need to. It shoved air. A short violent wind burst off the circle. White powder lifted like smoke. Li Gao thought it was nothing and drove in harder, but the wind thickened as Mike kept the circle going each rotation. Fed the next like a fan building speed from a slow start. The stone powder stopped falling. It began to spiral. It rose into a tight funnel between them. Li Gao blinked in confusion. Then the funnel flipped. The wind snapped back toward him. Like a slap, all the white powder slammed into his face. It packed his eyes and nose and mouth in one breath. Li Gao choked and stumbled. He swung blind and wild. His sword car veved empty air. His balance scattered like gravel on ice. Mike moved in. He stepped into the blind space, the way a driver slips into a gap in traffic. His deadwood sword came down not as a cut, but as a hammer. It struck Li Gao knee. From the side bone gave with a dull crack. Li Gao screamed and folded to the ground. The crowd exploded with shocked noise. No one expected the outsider to turn a cheap wooden sword into a storm. No one expected the proud disciple to fall in one brutal beat. Elder Xuanji rose from his seat. His face turned colder than the mountain wind. He flicked his fingers. A thin invisible force snapped across the ring. The rotten wooden sword in Mike's hands split in half. The broken end spun away and clattered on stone. Elder Xuanji spoke with final judgment in his voice. He declared that Mike had used crooked tricks. He declared the wager lost. He declared the wager lost. He declared the outsider would be beheaded. Enforcement disciples stepped forward and raised their blades. Their eyes showed relief. They wanted this to end. Mike looked at the broken sword in his hands. He looked past the ring to the cliff edge behind the platform. A narrow crack ran down the rock like a fault line. His mind cleared. Like shifting into the one gear that always finds grip, he lunged backward in one hard step. He drove the jagged broken blade into the rock crack. With all his weight, the blade bit deep and jammed. The sound rang like metal on stone. Even though it was only dead wood, Mike kept his hand on the hilt and held on. His knuckles turned white. His eyes stayed locked on Elder Xuanji. He did not beg. He did not plead. He anchored himself to the mountain, like a truck chaining down a load before a storm, as the broken blade jammed into the rock crack. The dead cliff answered with a deep, dull echo. It felt like something trapped for 1,000 years had been slapped awake. Then the main peak of Kangchong Mountain began to shake. Hard, loose stones felt like rain bluestone slabs on the platform, split one after another. The disciples who had been laughing a moment ago toppled and slid in panic. Screams rose everywhere. A jet of shachi, black as ink and streaked with dark red fire, burst out of the crack. It shot upward like a high-pressure oil line ripping open. Then it turned back and poured into Mike with unstoppable force. This was not clean, refined chi. It was violent, muddy, and hungry. Mike felt his dead Dantian flap, scorching hot. It was like boiling high-octane diesel being dumped into an empty tank. His snapped and clogged meridians were forced open by the surge. They crackled, like rusted gears grinding and biting their way into mesh. Mike squeezed his eyes shut against the pain. Inside that darkness, the power did not turn into dragons or tigers or immortal shadows. It became something he knew better than his own hands. A heavy truck V8 engine, shining with cold metal light. Boom, boom. Mike's heartbeat changed. It was no longer a human rhythm. It became the roar of 8 cylinders firing. Each pulse pumped burning fuel strength into every limb. He snapped his eyes open. The blue in his pupils burned red like brake lights on the high platform. Elder Xuanji stared in shock. Mike bared his teeth in a grin. There was the tired madness of a long-haul driver. In that smile he did not pull the broken blade free. He only swung his hand through empty air toward the elder, the black-red shachi in his palm. Compressed in a blink, it became a massive sword pressure wide enough to swallow the ring. That was not sword chi at all. It was a runaway semi-truck front end at full speed, carrying the momentum to crush anything in its path. Elder Xuanji felt alarm hit his instincts. He threw himself backward at once. Protective light flashed around him in frantic pulses. But the force was too fast and too heavy. It roared past as if air resistance meant nothing. A thin hiss cut through the cold wind, turbulent flow, tore the air open. Elder Xuanji felt sudden chill across his scalp. His tall hair knot that carried his pride and rank was cut clean off at the roots. Gray-white hair spilled down around his face. He looked exposed and humiliated. The entire arena fell into a dead stillness. Only the low growl inside Mike, like an engine at idle, echoed clearly through the mountain wind. Elder Xuanji lifted a trembling hand to the place where his hair knot had been sliced away. The calm, immortal look on his face twisted into something like a furious ghost. He let out a shriek that scraped the whole training ground raw around the arena. 9 bronze warning bells answered at the same time. Their sound rolled like heavy iron struck in the dark. The mountain air shook with it. White-robed figures poured in from every direction. They were inner gate enforcement disciples. They moved with practiced speed and hard eyes. In moments, they formed a Beidou sword formation. Layer after layer of sword light rose. Like a white tide, Mike stood trapped at the center. Mike could not understand the ritual words they shouted, but he understood the meaning in their faces. Every gaze promised a clean kill. The Shacha Q in his body kept roaring like a diesel engine. With the throttle pinned, it did not only mend his meridians, it made his blood feel like it was burning hot, and moving fast it made his mind sharp and loud. The sword tide pressed closer. Steel points flickered at his throat and ribs. Mike breathed once. Then he drove forward like a truck that refuses to brake. He smashed into the ring of blades with raw, brutal force. Each strike sounded like a heavy door. Slammed shut. A few disciples tried to close in and cut him down at arm length. They were hit by the violent rush of his shaki and thrown backward. Men and swords flew together. Several fine steel blades shattered into fragments. The moment they touched that savage power for a heartbeat, the crowd thought the formation would collapse. But this was a great sect with deep roots. Elder Xuanji waved a command banner with a face full of ice. The Beidou sword formation changed in an instant. The sword light stopped meeting him head-on. It became sticky, and clinging it wrapped him like tough rope. It dragged at his arms and legs. It stole space the way thick mud steals motion. Countless sword streaks circled and tightened. They did not cut deep. They wore him down. Mike forced his way forward. Step by step, sweat ran cold down his back in this strange world. The air itself felt like it wanted him gone. The loneliness of that rejection hit harder than pain. It felt like driving a dead highway that never ends. It felt like every vehicle on the road was coming straight at him. The formation herded him without him noticing. Each time he broke a gap, another gap closed. Each time he chose a path, the path bent him backward little by little. The ground under his boots changed. The air ahead looked warped. Loose stones on the ground did not roll. They trembled as if a hidden engine was idling under the earth. A faint metallic hum crawled up his teeth. Mike backed through the last line of trees and saw the forbidden edge of the back mountain. A massive gorge opened in front of him. Jagged stone spires leaned over a bottomless drop. Strange twisted magnetic light flickered between the rocks like cold lightning trapped in glass. This was the 10,000-foot magnetic gorge. Stories hit his mind even without words. Flying swords that passed through here would lose control, and fall metal would be shredded into iron dust in an instant. That was why even sect disciples feared this place. The pursuers stopped about 10 jang away. Their long swords trembled in their hands. The blades kept trying to tilt toward the gorge, as if an invisible hook had caught the steel and would not let go. Elder Xuanji pushed through the crowd and stepped to the front. He looked at Mike like a man watching prey reach the end of a cliff. A thin, cruel smile pulled at his mouth. Mike felt the only space behind him vanish. Then he felt something else in his pocket. The heavy chrome-plated wrench began to shake. It was being yanked by a force he could not see. It rattled hard against his thigh, like it wanted to tear free and fly straight into the metal, eating abyss. The pull on the wrench grew stronger with every breath. It felt like a giant magnet had latched onto the tool and was reeling it in. Mike tightened his fist inside his pocket and held it down with stubborn force. He stared into the 10,000-foot magnetic gorge and listened to the faint metallic hum. He understood this sound. It was not mysticism. It was field force singing behind him. The Beidou sword formation tightened again. The disciples did not dare step too close to the gorge, but their sword light still pressed him from every side. It was like trucks boxing him in on a narrow bridge with no shoulder and no exit. Elder Xuanji lifted his hand, and the disciples raised their blades together. A line of sword chi shot forward to push Mike one step closer to the drop. It was a clean, cruel method. No need to kill him with their own hands. Let the gorge do it. Mike planted his boots. He leaned back like a driver bracing a trailer against a jackknife. The shachi in his body still roared, but he could feel it thinning like fuel in a tank that has been running wide open too long. He glanced down at the wrench shaking in his pocket. Chrome vanadium, high density, high magnetic response in this place. It was not only a tool, it was bait, it was an anchor. It was an anchor, it was a steering input. His mind raced and the old truck logic snapped into place. If this gorge is one giant coil, then the field is not stable everywhere. It has gradients, it has weak spots and spikes. And if you throw a big piece of metal into a strong spike, you can scramble the pattern. Even for a moment, Mike ripped the wrench out. He did not throw it straight. He spun his whole body and sent it in a wide swinging arc. Like slinging a chain around a stuck axle, the wrench flew low over the ground. Then it hit the air above the gorge, and the pull yanked it upward violently. In that instant, the magnetic light in the gorge flared. It surged toward the wrench like hungry water. Toward a drain, the hum turned into a scape. Ream. The twisted lines of light snapped out of alignment. The effect was immediate. All the swords in the Beidou sword formation trembled hard. Several blades tore free from their owner's hands and shot toward the gorge. Disciples screamed and grabbed at empty air. The formation line wavered, the sword light thin. Mike did not waste the opening. He drove forward through the gap like a rig catching a green light after hours of red. He punched one disciple in the chest and stole momentum. He shoved another aside and broke out of the ring. Then the gorge pulled again, not only on the wrench, now on every piece of steel. More swords slipped free. A cluster of flying blades shot into the magnetic gorge and vanished. The whole formation snapped like a rope that has lost tension. Elder Xuanji roared in fury. He tried to stabilize the formation with hand seals, but the gorge did not care. The field swallowed sword ki, the way deep water swallows sound. Mike ran. He ran along the cliff edge and cut behind a wall of jagged rock. The humming chased him like a swarm for a few breaths. He was free. Then the shachi inside him sputtered. The V8 roar in his chest coughed. Once then, faded. Like an engine starved of fuel, Mike stumbled. His legs went soft. The world tilted. A cold mechanical counting started inside his mind. It was not a voice from the sect. It was not a demon whisper. It was his own heartbeat turning into a timer. 10-9. The numbers dropped with ruthless certainty. Mike pressed a hand to his chest. His pulse was fading fast, and he knew with sudden clarity, if the count reached 0, he would not wake up anywhere ever again. Mike's heart in his chest felt like an overheated piston. Every time it slammed his ribs, it burned. Like fire. 10, then 9. The blood-red numbers on his vision jumped with each heavy beat. When the shachi vanished, weakness flooded his legs and tried to fold him to the ground. He refused to collapse. He clenched his teeth and ran like a wounded animal toward the spirit pig pen. That pen was where he began in this world, and now it was the only road left behind him. Elder Xuanji roared in frantic fury, but the sound drifted far away like wind across a long empty highway. Mike stumbled through the gate and fell into the fermented stink of the pen. He dropped beside the giant spirit pig. He had named Big Mama 8, then 7. His heartbeat raced like a heavy truck going downhill. With no brakes, the needle in his mind was already buried in the red. If he did nothing, the next beat would be an engine blowout. He sucked air in ragged gulps, and the edges of the world began to blur. He forced himself to stare at Big Mama as she slept. This creature weighed tons, yet her breathing was slow. Her belly rose and fell with a strange loose rhythm. That looseness felt like the moment on Route 66 when he slid an 18-wheeler into neutral 6. Then 5 neutral, shift to neutral. Mike shouted the command inside of the command inside his own skull. Closed his eyes. He stopped trying to fight the dying beat with brute force. He imagined himself back in the cab. He eased off the throttle. He pushed the shifter. He cut the power connection. His blood felt like it understood in the instant. The clutch cut. The frantic surge turned into a steady glide 4. He breathed in long like a midnight highway 3. He breathed out calm like an engine at idle. The pressure that had threatened to split his veins vanished. In its place came a silence he had never known, not just slow control, like a mountain-heavy machine sliding on pure inertia, without a sound. This was Taiji's stillness. Stillness inside movement that still carried stillness in the moment. His breath and heartbeat finally matched. The countdown stopped. The blood-red digit froze at 1. Then it softened into a warm gold light and scattered through his limbs. Outside the pen, Elder Xuanji stood in rags and watched Mike sit there with eyes closed. The sight drove him into a rage. Inner Elder had been toyed with by a mortal. If the sword formation was broken, then they would die together. His face twisted. He spat a mouthful of blood essence. His hands formed seals in a bouleur. His exhausted dantian flared like a dying lamp. Burning its last oil, bloodlight swallowed him, and he became a living sword pill packed with ruin. He screamed as he blasted straight toward Mike to kill him in one strike. Elder Xuanji became a blood-red sword pill and ripped the air apart as he slammed toward the pig pen. The killing pressure shattered the wooden rails into splinters. Before he even arrived, Mike did not retreat. Even a step he closed his eyes as if he were facing a runaway semi-loaded to the limit with its brakes. Gone in his mind, this was not a mystical killing move. It was pure inertia rushing straight for a cliff edge. The only way to live was to take control of that loss of control. The bloodlight reached his face, and he opened his eyes, his feet spread and rooted into the mud like tree. Trunks' his hands rose slowly and held an invisible circle in front of his chest. In his grip, that circle became the steering wheel that had carried him across hundreds of thousands of miles. The instant the straight line force crashed into his arms, he yielded and moved with it. His waist and legs forced the power to travel as one piece through his frame. He used a strange natural neutral shift catch and turn and release. He did not block the force, he guided it, the way a driver corrects a skid on ice. His hands drew a smooth round arc. The blood sword pill lost its straight path and began to spin along the circle he drew. Mike borrowed the spin and felt the centrifugal pull build. He roared like a truck climbing a steep grade and slamming into low gear. His arms exploded with strength, and he threw the force back the way it came. Elder Shranji tried to scream, but his voice drowned inside his own collapse. Ying, Qi. The blood sword pill carved a twisted U-turn through the air. It detonated faster than it arrived. Blinding white light swallowed everything. The blast crushed sound and shattered his eardrums. Mike heard his heart give one final long beep. Everything fell into dead silence. His body jerked hard. Mike woke up gulping air and slammed his forehead into the steering wheel. Diesel, stink and cold air from the vents filled his nose. Sword screams and thunder were gone. Only the night wind slid past outside the window. He lifted his head. In a daze, he was in the cab of his truck at a route 66. Rest area. The dashboard glowed a dim green. The engine was still idling and vibrating with a familiar steady tremor. Mike wiped sweat off his face and gave a tired half laugh. He reached for the shifter beside him, and his fingers shook with leftover weakness. Then his eyes fell on his left wrist. His whole body went rigid. A faint red ring like a sword scar circled the rough skin. It looked like an old contract stamped into flesh under the cold Arizona moonlight. It quietly burned warm.